What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA look ahead. We are on to number 27. It's the New York Knicks, which means I'm talking to Knicks Film School's Andrew Claudio. Follow him on the Twitter machine. That's at Andrew J. Claudio _. It'll be up on your screen, and the link to that will be in the YouTube and podcast description, as well as where you can support Knicks Film School. That'll be in the YouTube and podcast description as well. They do an exhaustively fantastic job over there, so go support them. Wanted to pre-record this intro because when we were talking, it was just before or it happened during, I'm not quite clear on it, that Shams of ESPN, that's going to take a while to get used to, reported that Mitchell Robinson is now just going to be out following ankle surgery through the end of 2024 into 2025. Doesn't impact anything we're talking about. Andrew actually talks about not expecting to see him before the All-Star break. But just wanted to add that note here. And also just to remind you, go join our Discord. The link to that's in the podcast and YouTube description. We will be running our over-under competition. If you win, you'll get a free merch item of your choice to support the show. And I think this year I got to clear it with Grant, but I'm sure he's on board. We're going to allow the winner to also guest host. Maybe you'll do a mailbag and you can throw the questions at us if that's something you're interested in. So the link to that will be in the link to our Discord will be in the podcast and YouTube description. The contest is only going to be running for members of that Discord. We've already had a bunch of new members since this started, so hurry up. I'll be putting it out this weekend, and you'll have until I'll probably leave it up opening night for you to go through. So head over to the Discord, and look, if you haven't done so already, just subscribe. Apple, Spotify, on YouTube, hit the sub button, turn post notifications on, leave comments, likes, comment on our shorts too. Help that algo love us back. Really help the community continue to grow. We appreciate all your support as always. And if you are looking for a way to support the show, this isn't part of the merch, even though it's a cool shirt, but visit our shop and you can support the show that way by buying some of our swag, our HardwoodKnocks swag. That's enough out of me though. Let's get to talking a lot of Knicks with the one, the only KFS's GMAC. What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA season look ahead. We're entering the home stretch. We're up to the New York Knicks, who did basically nothing this offseason, but we're going to talk to GMAC from Knicks Film School anyway. He's also the producer for the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini. Very good podcast if you love listening to the NBA stuff at large, so go check that out. And he's also the host, the founder, the CEO of Mets Therapy, which you can find on all your social platforms, Instagram, TikTok, I'm assuming YouTube as well. Andrew Claudio does a whole lot, does it super well. No one else I'd rather talk Knicks with, especially at this moment. You are coming off of, we're recording this on a Thursday. Nothing really happened on Wednesday. So how are you doing?
Nope, nothing happened. I'm here to clearly just break down the Knicks win over the Washington Wizards in the preseason, because that's the only thing that happened in the New York area. No teams won gigantic historic baseball games that advanced them into playoff rounds that they never advanced to last night. So happy to be here, Dan, as always.
I am legitimately always happy when like diehard fans, their teams are doing really well. And so congratulations to you on the Mets making the NLCS. I'm so unplugged from every other sport that's not the NBA. Was this even in the back of your mind as an expectation entering this season for this team?
This season? No. Yeah, and when I say this season, there's like 2 months of this season. I thought that they were headed for 90 losses and blowing up the team. And then June 1st rolled around and they made some roster changes throughout the year. They've been really good at admitting mistakes on the fly. And then I don't know how plugged into you are to like the gimmicks that have showed up. They have a second baseman named Jose Iglesias that has a song called OMG that is like #1 on the charts. And he's like a pop star, and he has the remix coming out on Friday with Pitbull on it. It's a Spanish song and it is a banger. I encourage his name is Candelita. And so like that became an anthem for them. And from the time they called him up from AAA, this pop star, he like the team has the best record in baseball. Then I'm not sure how much you're aware of Grimace, the McDonald's character.
I know. Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
So they have also the best record in baseball since Grimace randomly threw out the first pitch on what his quote unquote birthday is. And at first it was funny because they won 8 straight games after Grimace threw out the first pitch. And I was like, oh, wow, this is stupid, but it's fun. They're winning. And now like you have Mets fans at the game last night wearing a Grimace costume. not a jersey for Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, their favorite player. No, I decided to dress as Grimace to a Mets game. So, like the Hawk Tour girl throughout the first pitch, they have a great record since then. Pete Alonso, their first baseman, went pumpkin picking and brought a pumpkin to the locker room, and he's like, "This is the rally pumpkin," and they just like keep winning with the like. There's so many
Is the
things.
rally pumpkin still there? It might be rotting
Yeah,
by now.
probably it's like covered in champagne, but that's the thing. All the things in the past that we'd look at and be like, "This is stupid." Now it's like, "Oh, that's cute," and it's cute because they're winning, and winning, adds a different context to it. So, it's been really fun, and I hope it continues.
Well, I'm excited for you, excited for all Mets fans, even Yankees fans too, and Padres fans as well. They have a special place in my heart because San Diego fucking rules. We're here to talk basketball though. And for anyone, we did a pod shortly after the Mikal Bridges trade. So we're not going to focus like too much on the normal look ahead stuff. Like this is going to be largely about the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, which is not, doesn't it feel like, and it's probably because it happened while we were going through training camps and the preseason has since started. It hasn't even been 2 weeks and it feels like it's been 2 months since it happened. So my first question to you is, did it surprise you at all? Not necessarily that the Knicks were interested, but just the timing of it and the steps that like it went through to get, the reporting around it, like what they put on the table initially versus what they ended up giving up.
So I have to bring the Mets back into this because the Mets had to sweat out the final week of the week of the baseball regular season for a playoff spot. They were going back and forth with 2 other teams, the Braves and the Diamondbacks for the last 2 playoff spots. And Friday night, the last Friday night of the regular season, I'm sitting there. The Mets are losing. This is back when I was like, oh man, they're going to crash and burn again, these Mets. And I'm texting a bunch of friends that are Mets fans. I'm like, hey, they still got 2 games left. It's not the end of the world. And then someone just texted me like, holy shit. It's like, whoa, what do you mean? Like, I'm staring at the Mets game. What happened? And dearly departed Adrian Wojnarowski is the one I usually go to for alerts. I then go to my phone. It's like, what are people holy shitting about? And the timing of it being that Friday night when media day is 2 days away. And I'm thinking I could still kind of tiptoe my way into the NBA season and not like, okay, this Villanova thing's going to be fun. This all 4 of them actually sharing the court together. And then to see the trade happen, I think the timing of it being before media day, like right before around the same time that the Dame Lillard trade happened, was shocking. The reality of it, when you look at why it was now, when you factor in like all the maneuvering they were going to have to do to make this happen, the fact that Randall is like headed into basically a contract year because he can opt out at the end of the year, and it didn't look like they were going to land on an extension. The fact that like DiVincenzo, I don't even know how disgruntled he was. He's refuted any inklings of it, so I don't know if him not being in the starting lineup was actually that big an issue. But the fact that it seemed like if they wanted to do this was really their last chance to make it happen, especially under the new CBA restrictions. Mm-hmm. So it's become less and less shocking as the last 10 days or 2 weeks have gone by. I'll say the initial shock of like, oh my God, they just did this was there. But realizing the timing almost had to be then has made it less and less of a surprise. And I will say, like, I'm not a reporter, I'm not a journalist, but I did go to Summer League, and this was the talk at Summer League after like everybody was asking me about Mikal, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's exciting. It's like, hey, you hearing this thing about Towns and how they're still interested in him? And it's like, wait, really? So that is the conversation, and we've obviously heard their interest in Towns for years, but the fact that it happened is not shocking. The fact of exactly when it happened was indeed shocking.
What do you think went into or was the biggest factor to them kind of relenting where they tried to package Mitchell Robinson initially rather than Dante DiVincenzo? There's even been some reporting about they weren't initially going to include the first round pick. And so I understand your view of, well, it kind of had to be now when you look at the restrictions of their payroll moving forward. But I've seen a lot of people frame it as, and I tend to agree with Macri's interpretation of this, where it's like the Mitch injury accelerated their plans to do this. And I'm just like, the Knicks had to know that this was a possibility before like it was actually announced. I know it kind of cropped up that Mitch would miss time.
Oh,
and so,
okay.
I don't necessarily ascribe to the idea that, oh, the Mitch injury like accelerated. We're willing to trade Dante DiVincenzo now. So what was it, the Julius Randle and his future, or was it really just they thought now is the time to strike? Like we've kind of continued to go all in. I'm just curious as to what you think was the biggest factor to them, again, relenting on what was their baseline offer. And it seems like at least 2 degrees worth, where it's like they didn't want to give up that Detroit first rounder and they didn't want to give up DiVincenzo, and they end up giving up both.
It's a combination of everything. The fact that, I mean, say Mitch was going to miss the first month of the season, and you're looking at him back in November. I don't think they do this deal. Say Hartenstein resigns. I don't think they do this deal. Say you have more confidence in Julius as you're playing the 5, which Tibbs has not played him at the 5 all the entire time that he's been here, and he probably isn't going to be playing the 5 in Minnesota either, because Naz Reid will play in those lineups where Julius and Naz can play the 5 together. They just had a legit need at center, and I will co-sign my colleague Benji Ritholtz, who said, like, that's not why you make a Karl-Anthony Towns trade, because you need a center. And all the reporting has suggested they went out looking for other center options. And I think at the end of the day, with the Julius extension negotiations probably getting to a point where he wasn't going to take what the market, he wasn't going to take what they were offering him, which was probably less than what he thinks he believes on the market. And the fact that, if they wanted to do this for years, they have a certain belief in Karl-Anthony Towns that he makes them better. And the more I've talked myself into this trade, I think there's some truth to what they can be offensively. I think it's a combination of, now they have a needed center. This guy that plays center is an upgrade over Randall. We might lose Julius at the end of the year anyway, and waiting to do this in the season doesn't allow us to do the very cute cap mechanics of what they did with all of their non-minimum minimums that they stacked to make this trade happen. Like, the actual timing of when they had to do this was now, so that way you don't have the same roster and salary cap restrictions you would have to navigate in season. And it just made it almost like a deadline. Like, we have to do this before the season starts, and the best time to do it is before media day. So at least these things, we can get a full preseason in before, with all these new pieces playing together.
Yeah, that's interesting, because they still could have made it happen. You just would have had to give up like a member of your rotation in addition to the 2 players you're already given up.
So it's more advantageous to do it now then?
That's what I'm saying. That would be the. I don't know if like the difference between like giving up Precious Achiuwa is like would force me into that timeline, but I totally understand.
But is Minnesota doing that? Precious Achiuwa.
No, you need to find another team. And I know people are saying, well, it's harder to make those roster spots, definitely harder midseason, but there's enough like trade exceptions and mid-level exceptions floating around. You could have done it. I don't have a problem with the timing. I was just fascinated that, like, what did it take to get you here? Like, why wasn't this done sooner was my point. If you're all of a sudden like relented on DiVincenzo,
I see. Okay.
I've kind of had a hard time wrapping my head around that. I'm not faulting them for doing it. I understand the trade for both sides, but I found that element intriguing.
So see, the way I perceived your question was, why didn't they do it? Why wouldn't they wait till later to do it? Why wouldn't they wait until during the season? Why did they do it sooner? From all accounts, it sounds like they tried to. Apparently this was a draft night conversation that they had when they had 2 draft picks. Julius wasn't extension eligible then either. So maybe they went into the summer thinking Mitch will be back. We'll see his progress. We'll see if we can work something out with Julius. And, they obviously found out that they were going to have a need at center, which, like, it was Monday of that week. It was reported that Mitch was going to miss till at earliest December. And I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure we see Mitch Robinson. I'll say the All-Star break is the date I'm circling.
If he's, I would agree with you that I'll be shocked if we see him before 2025.
Yeah, like him or Porzingis coming back is the conversation. Who comes back first?
That's a great. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah,
I will say if we're talking All-Star break, part of me just wonders at that point if he's even still on the roster. Like, was he salary ballast as part of another trade at that point?
One of our Claudio Casino questions is, how many games does Mitchell Robinson play for the Knicks this year? And the over/under I set was 0.5.
Ooh, what did you take?
Well, so we haven't done that episode
Okay.
yet. So that's a spoiler for when we do that episode. Is that will Mr. Robinson play for the Knicks this year? Is my question.
I'm not even going to answer that because I would have to. That's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many different ways that you could just give, but like maybe he's just still injured and can't play this year. That's also a possibility.
What if it's season-ending injury? What this may end up, and this is like no disrespect to Mitch. Like I hope he comes back. I hope he should contribute to this team. I think there's gonna be series. Like the best defender of Joel Embiid in the playoffs last year was Mitchell Robinson. Hartenstein couldn't stay out of foul trouble. They had no other real answers at center except for when they would switch Anunoby onto him. But Mitch, when Embiid wasn't trying to rip his ankle off, defended him better than anybody else in that series. And I would want him for a series against Philly.
The other thing too is like Mitchell Robinson is critical if you want to view the Knicks as deep enough still. There's almost like you could make the case, and I might even make the case that he's now going to be almost in his ideal role where we don't need to care if Mitchell Robinson can only play 22 minutes a night. Like that's all you're going to, and that'll have to have some overlap with the Towns minutes anyway. So if you have him coming off the bench because everyone's concerned about the depth of this rotation now, which is a fair concern. But if Mitchell Robinson's healthy, like that's a starting caliber player coming off the bench, kind of like we've grown to see the Knicks have over these past few years. And that just becomes huge. I know that, again, there's overlap. That's Karl-Anthony Towns' best position, but those two could play together. So, yeah, I still view him as just super important. But is he going to be healthy? And you have to make the call. You are all in on now. So even if you think he's coming back this year, but you don't think it's till after the trade deadline, you're trading him probably at the nadir of his value. But like, you need to win games. Like your window is now. Like you've decided it's now.
They've done a really good job since Leon Rose took over of we're not going to make a move because everyone's telling us to. Like we will, if we don't like the deal, we're not going to make it. Donovan Mitchell is example one, right? They had plenty of opportunities to trade Mitchell Robinson before he signed this new contract. There was a Julius Randle trade on the table if they wanted to pursue it. Like they had options to make deals for a long time. And then they had this offseason where, and like my theory, and I have nothing to support this, but I have run it by some people and they're like, oh, that's not completely off. The first free agent that they ever lost, the first player that they wanted to bring back that they weren't able to bring back was Isaiah Hartenstein. And it's because they signed him to such a good deal the first time and his value got so high that it actually, like by CBA rules, like made it impossible for them to bring him back. And that changed the calculus to, oh, now we're losing assets. It used to be like, if we think we want to keep something, we keep it. If we don't want to keep it, goodbye, RJ Barrett, goodbye, Emmanuel Quickly, goodbye, Quentin Grimes. Like they've found ways to part with players they don't want anymore on their terms. This was the first time that something left and it wasn't on their terms. And it rechanged the calculus to, man, we're going to start losing pieces. Now it's time to go all in. And you saw them go like all the chips to the middle of the table for Mikal Bridges. And now it's like, all right, I actually found some chips in my pocket. Here, we're going all in for Karl-Anthony Towns. And, you know, that's why the Knicks being all in is going to be a new feeling of like, oh, this is a fun story. The Knicks getting a 2 seed or like beating the Cavs in the first round. No, now there's expectations with this roster.
Is that when you're looking, because we're going to get into more Karl-Anthony Towns stuff, but I'm asking everyone for a promotional episode that'll go up like right when the season starts. What is the biggest storyline that you're tracking for this team? Is it the overarching expectations now because they've made all these moves? Is it maybe one of the new additions? Like what is it?
I mean, as far as storylines are concerned, it has to be like what Karl-Anthony Towns looks like in New York, I think is the biggest.
And that to you, and I'm even sorry to interrupt, but that to you would trounce like, what does Mikal Bridges look like? We're just, it's so, I would agree with you. I think just because Mikal Bridges is just universally, like he just fits anywhere and does anything. So
yeah,
it's just interesting that they gave up so much for this guy, but the biggest storyline is, oh, this other center that they brought in, they didn't give nearly as much draft equity up. They gave up real stuff, but.
So that's the funny thing. And again, you alluded to again, my colleague, Mr. Macri, like, when the Knicks went all in for Mikal Bridges, I don't know anybody that said that was a bad trade by the Knicks. Like they gave up a lot. They definitely probably overpaid for Mikal Bridges, like 5 picks, 1 heavily protected Milwaukee pick, and some salary filler, like, and all the swaps, right? But everybody's immediate thought was, man, they have Anunoby and Bridges, like 2 of the best role players potentially in the NBA, one of the best wing combos. Like, you've now created something that is contender worthy, and if they could figure out the right lineup combinations, that has a chance to be deadly. And with Towns, because there's so much concern with Towns, the person, the personality, the match with the market, and what he's just flat out been over the course of his career, the Knicks gave up just flat out less than what they gave up for Bridges, but there's so many questions for one trade over the other. So, like, it's why I just have no questions about Mikal Bridges. I think he's going to fit perfectly in New York. And the guy never misses games and is playing for Tom Thibodeau. It's going to be a match made in heaven, you know. Although I had one of my, again, another Claudio Casino bet. How many games will Mikal Bridges miss this year? 0.5. I dare somebody to take the over under Tibbs. Like, could you see it? The day that the Mikal Bridges misses his first game, and it's like, oh, Tibbs up to his old. Of course, he misses his first game under Tom Thibodeau. It has to be the concerns about Karl-Anthony Towns. And here's the thing: I think they're going to be an outstanding regular season team. I think they're going to finish top 3 or 4 in offense, top 12 or 13 in defense. They're going to win close to 55 games, but the expectations changed now. This isn't let's just win a bunch of games and hopefully make the second round anymore. There's a conference finals expectations on this team and this roster, and especially when you've gone this all in, that, you know, for the first time in a long time, I can say it will be a disappointment for me if the Knicks don't make it. And I welcome the challenge of that storyline and who it's going to fall on, which part of it might fall on Tibbs, but back to the original point, Karl-Anthony Towns, and going all in on him as your second best guy will have a lot to say about whether they accomplish it or not.
I think mine is, and this dovetails nicely with where I wanted to start with the Karl-Anthony Towns stuff on the court, is they played basically every trade chip that they have. Basically, like, they still have stuff they could do, but they paid basically all the trade chips that they have. And I would argue, because of who's gone out, the types of players that have come in, well, I don't think you can argue with their fits. I find them even more reliant on Jalen Brunson than they were before, just because of, I had concerns before this trade about, is there enough playmaking, shot creation? With Julius Randle going out, I'm of course going to have those same concerns, but I'm fascinated that they made these series of bets, pretty much all of which are inarguable. They're arguable, but you don't look at anything they've done and say they shouldn't have done it. Even the Mikal Bridges price tag, they've waited long enough, by the way. You know, we thought, like, they sat out these other sweepstakes that didn't make sense. The trade landscape has changed. I don't think they made moves for the sake of making moves. They just got good enough to where it was, you can make these decisions now. I'm just fascinated to see, like, how much do you think Jalen Brunson benefits from the Knicks basically playing, you know, Josh Hart, debatable if you want to go call it 5 out with him, but you can even see it in the preseason. He's going to get lost in the amount of space that he has in the half court relative to the past 2 years. It's like, how big of, like, a boon is this for him specifically? But then 2, do you at all agree or find interest in, okay, the Knicks made all these moves, and yet you could argue now that Jalen Brunson is even more indispensable than he was before?
If I had any worries about Jalen Brunson, I'd be with you. He's the prince that was promised, man. Like, between the extension and the ways he's gotten better in both of his first 2 seasons, despite the circumstances not always creating a world where someone can get better. Like, the guy averaged 28.7 points per game last year, and for half of it, Precious Achiuwa played the 4. You know, next to Josh Hart and Isaiah Hartenstein. Like, the spacing issues were there last year with 3 non-shooters on the floor. And oh, by the way, his first year, he largely played next to Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, and Isaiah Hart and Mitchell Robinson. You know, like, they would go to lineups with Manuel Quickley that were great and obviously boosted the spacing. And, you know, this is going to be an issue for Twitter, which, who cares, throughout the season. Like Josh Hart starting, like, the only way you can go 5 out is if Deuce McBride plays the 2. And I, like, want to see Deuce with those starters lineups because I want to see them actually have 5 shooters on the floor at the same time. But what Josh Hart does on the floor is contribute to winning. Like, he's a playoff hero for this franchise and one of the leaders. So I'm at the point where I'm fine with all the good things that Josh Hart does on the floor leading to winning. And like, if a foot's in the paint, then you like there's rebounding that Josh Hart adds, and there's, oh, by the way, some big playoff threes. Like, I'm not putting it past him to shoot 35% from three this year. They'll still ignore him, but he just has to make them pay as a result.
I would just say even more important than the percentage for me would just be the volume. I'm a big believer in that volume kind of begets overreaction.
Yeah, I agree. So, like, look, Jalen Brunson now playing with nobody in the dunker spot is going to be fascinating because he's someone that's been able to score at a high volume with so many people in the paint. Now that it's going to be much more open, they've created an environment for the offensive ceiling to be much higher, not just for him, but for everybody, but specifically to him. I mean, are we looking at a 30-point per game season from Jalen Brunson? Is he headed toward a Dame Lillard ceiling of offensive efficiency?
I'll be doing BR's staple MVP ladder this year, so everyone can get mad at me in advance. My first one, my preseason one, I had him 4th, and my line was just like, this is going to be a 30.8 assist season from him at minimum. I do worry, is he going to like see ghosts when he gets into the paint, though, of like the bodies of Knicks players pass and he gets spooked? But
right.
There's my concern wasn't that I doubt Jalen Brunson. It's just that when you look at these really high level contenders, most of them are going to have at least 2 guys in the top 50 of self-generated buckets. The Knicks have one of those guys. Karl-Anthony Towns was not in the top 50 last year. Mikal Bridges, not even as the focal point of the Nets offense, wasn't in the top 50 last year. I'm not saying it won't work. I find it fascinating. And it's a testament to Jalen Brunson that the Knicks feel confident enough to travel this path when you look at the asset outlay, because he is that good. And I think that they're leaning into the 5-out model and what I think can really work. But then they're also kind of like, they're zagging a little bit because the entire thought process was like, you need those 2 high-level creators. And as of right now, until Karl-Anthony Towns or Mikal Bridges proves me wrong, both of whom are exceptional players, but like the Knicks don't have that. They have one. And I think the rebuke to that too would be they had one before if you just don't trust Julius Randle. Okay, that's fine. I just view him as having more on-ball gravity than a Towns or a Bridges right now as a playmaker specifically. So I think some Knicks fans already interpret it as like, I'm negative on this trade. I'm fascinated by this. It's not, I don't have a negative feeling towards it. This feels genuinely unique where it's, we understand what they're doing, but to be this dependent on Jalen Brunson, which you always would have been dependent on Jalen Brunson, but like maybe they see something in Towns or Bridges that we just haven't seen yet, and there's that potential too. But like OG Anunoby's not. We're done. I'm done. This has been like we did it for like 6 years. It's like, he might add some on-ball layers. He has those like 1 to 3 drives a game where it's like he's kind of spinning. All right. Clyde will say spinning and winning at that point. But so I find the word is fascinating. I'm not down on it. I'm not super high on it. I'm intrigued.
What's the key word in what you said about Julius just now? On ball.
Playoffs.
Well, playoffs, yes, which Towns has some questions he has to answer too, but like the on-ball gravity is a thing. Like when you have to pay attention to Julius Randle when he has the ball. And I was looking forward to him being on the floor with 4 shooters at the same time this season. And them going to some versions of OG Anunoby as your center. Which I mean would have went completely against Tom Thibodeau's philosophy of rim protection, but it leans into some of the death lineups that we've seen over the years, which I talked about the last time the Knicks made a blockbuster trade with you. The on-ball gravity was a thing, and like Mitchell Robinson, there's this weird playoff series against the Cavs where Mitchell Robinson was attracting 2 every time the shot went up, so it's not even on ball or off ball, it's on shot attempt, or so it's like not even a quantifiable stat.
Rebounding gravity,
right? Like he's so important that we're now going to send both Mobley and Allen at him.
The numbers that year where the Knicks' most efficient offense came after a Mitchell Robinson offensive rebound.
So that's the big difference though, is we've gone from prioritizing as many shot attempts on a possession as possible and on ball gravity to prioritizing making your first shot as often as possible and off-ball gravity. Because to your point about spacing, the fact that it's really just Josh Hart that you can sag off of, and then he'll be able to provide some rebounding as a result. What you've seen in how they've played so far, when a defender puts a foot in the paint or tries to, sag a little bit on drives off of Josh Hart, he follows said defender and, makes it so that way the gap to him getting a rebound is shorter. And it helps when Jalen Brunson doesn't need that much space anyway. But when it's just one defender that is now going to be potentially double teaming, and you have Josh Hart already mid drive, it creates more opportunity. You've seen Step Brothers, right? The Will Ferrell. So it's like there's more room for activities, Dan. Like I can't wait for so much room for activities on the basketball court on the offensive end for the Knicks this year. And we haven't even talked about what I think they're going to be on defense yet.
Which we will get to, but I want to stick with the offense, and I want to ask the baseline simplified question first. Karl-Anthony Towns is guarded like he's a DEFCON level 1 threat from beyond the arc, because he is. But I've always just had issues with his volume, with the exception of maybe one season. Will he take more threes on this iteration of the Knicks? He was at the same number as Julius Randle per game last year. Do you see him getting back to 7 or 8? He's never even had a season where he was at 8.
I'm pulling up a stat because I want to make sure I get the number right. So Julius Randle 2 years ago, on the Knicks, shot 8.3 threes a game. Per 36 minutes, he shot
probably 4 because Tibbs was playing him 50 minutes that year. Yeah.
8.4. So
all right, look at that.
The exact same.
Load was managed. Good job, Tibbs.
Quite literally. So what I remember from that year is the volume was up there with Steph Curry for threes a game. And it was to your point about the emphasis. I think that's what they're going to do is just like, KAT, we need you at 8 to 9 threes a game. And it's going to be the same emphasis, and it's going to be part of our formula. And they're going to take 40 to 50 threes per game as a team. And I mean, for those who have had questions about Tom Thiobdeau on the offensive end in the past, I've seen it up close. This man is not the dinosaur that, he was. I mean, his talent has dictated how his teams have played. But like, I think they're going to lean very heavy into the Celtics model of like, get as many threes up a game. They have the shooting to do it. And I think that's the direction this is all headed, especially from a Towns perspective. Like, it wouldn't shock me if he's averaging close to 9 threes a game, at least per 36 this season.
Is there anything else because also we talk a lot about the spacing Jalen Brunson's going to get. Towns has kind of never had this perfect storm of circumstances where, look at the last 2 years in Minnesota. Not only is he not really the primary screener anymore because Rudy Gobert's been there, one of the things that kind of flew under the radar is that Minnesota's wing shooting was a deficit, which is why everyone's elated they have Dante DiVincenzo. So now he's the primary screener, has all this different sort of space. And I know the Jalen Brunson Towns pick and roll will be like the thing everyone wants to see. But is there anything else? Like maybe, I don't actually think they're going to go to this too much where it's Towns without Brunson, because I think so much of his value might be intermingled with what Jalen Brunson's able to do. But like when you're talking about Jalen Brunson, maybe not initiating everything or finishing plays, is there something about Karl-Anthony Towns that you're most interested to see how he'll impact the off, whether it's stuff in the post or how often does he play in lineups with Brunson? Anything along those lines?
So I've talked myself into him as a hub. Like, that was always my thought before the trade, that the Knicks how they could make up for losing Hartenstein, is that you make Julius the new Hartenstein on offense, and you run the offense through him as a hub in the high post. And then you have Anunoby guard the center on the other end, and it's you don't lose much. With KAT, I don't think he's had, to your point about his perimeter shooting, his wing shooting not being as good. This team's also going to cut a ton this year. Mm-hmm. So if you operate out of the high post and you've got Anunoby cutting, you got Bridges cutting, you got Josh Hart cutting, or any of these bench pieces, you have options now for him to get closer to he's never averaged more than 4.8 assists per game. But like, maybe he can get back to that being a regular thing where KAT's averaging like 5 assists, or maybe just closer to 4.5, with that being how he does things, where you have guys moving around him and it creating opportunities. So him becoming more of a passer this year, as weird as it sounds, because you think Karl-Anthony Towns, you think shooting, but I think there is an element to his game now that he's going to be in some really perfect circumstances on the offensive end that could elevate as well.
I am really interested to see if he can do the stuff like, we especially the past 2 years, we're not seeing him passing a ton out of the short roll to the corners or cutters. And like that's something we know the Knicks are going to do, especially when it comes to like I think the biggest thing for him might be he's in space. Like, can he find those corner shooters for the Knicks? Like that ends up being huge. And that's a way for him to maybe, I don't want to say inflate his assist total, but average more assists. And that's not necessarily hub stuff, but that's stuff that Isaiah Hartenstein was really good at.
It's also stuff that Julius Randle was really good at. And last year when Jalen Brunson was their only guy, and there's this Kings game from last year that I'm going to always bring up because it was a eureka moment for me where Mike Brown, I think he's a good coach, but for some reason, the entire game was like, I'm going to just double Jalen at half court. And the Knicks just like hit Josh Hart on the short roll, and like Josh was playing 4-on-3, and then if it wasn't Josh Hart, I'm hit a Hartenstein on the short roll. Josh Hart had 11 assists that night. Hartenstein had 6, and Brunson was like, "Fine, I'll just like this is what we'll do when they double." And it was the moment I realized, oh, even if you double him, we have a plan. And now Karl-Anthony Towns is in the short roll, and like Josh Hart could still be there too, but I project that Hart will be somewhat of a screener, especially if they're gonna like put weaker defenders on him on the offensive side of the ball. And so I think they'll bring him into a lot of actions. And if you double and you bring Josh Hart, then guess who's also on the corners? Like Karl-Anthony Towns is on the corner as well. And so also if you do the Brunson to KAT pick and roll and you decide to like play with fire and double, to your point, he's either got like a lane to the basket because he's rolling, or he's got 2 of the best corner 3-point shooters in Bridges and Anunoby, or like Deuce McBride out there to potentially, win, potentially lead to a possession of points. So I'm excited about the offensive side of the ball for the Knicks. It's the thing I'm most excited about it. I'll be honest.
I'm curious to see if he can do more of that stuff on like kind of, I don't want to say dead stop drives. Like maybe he's popping, he's catching like out of the pick and roll, and he decides like he's going to attack off the dribble. Julius Randle is also kind of good at that stuff where it's not catching it on the roll and making those reads necessarily. It's can you, if he's going to get downhill, which Towns has the ability to do, can he find more of those, those kick out opportunities or those cutters in those situations? Again, I don't think he's ever operated with any semblance of spacing like the Knicks are going to have now, even with Josh Hart being on the floor. Defense.
Man was playing. Hold on, the man was playing next to Rudy Gobert like the last 2 seasons, like out of position, and then like Jaden McDaniels, great wing defender. It reminded me a lot of Mitchell Robinson and RJ Barrett next to Julius. Like that's why Julius had to get the volume up, and he wasn't that great a 3-point shooter. Well, yeah, KAT is now. There's going to be a ton of space for him to operate as well.
What do you make of the defense now? Post Towns trade. I think the only thing I'll say before I throw it to you is I do think people have a very outmoded view of what Karl-Anthony Towns is on defense. And I was probably guilty of that like early last season, still like hanging on to it. I think he's made a lot of strides, maybe not in the way that Tibbs is used to using his bigs when you look at making strides, but this idea that like the Knicks have just punted on defense in the middle is just, it's so hyperbolic to me. And I was surprised that so many people had that sentiment following the trade.
So I'd actually be curious to turn the question back on you then. Okay, so I have to answer it. I mean, I have my concerns.
What is the question that you're throwing back at me? The same
one? Just like, what are your thoughts on KAT as a defender? If you think people have gone too far one direction about him as a defender, because I have my hesitations, and I think it's why expecting a Tom Thiobdeau team to be top 10 in defense again, or, to have top 10 in both is probably not happening. But I also recognize what he was. Everybody points to the Denver series. He didn't shut down Jokic. What he did, and Dane Moore came on our pod and spoke to this, like he would redirect Jokic to Gobert, or because he just used his big body to get in the way, like he made things difficult for Jokic. And I think sometimes that's what he's going to have to do if he's playing against Embiid, or if he's playing against, Giannis. And then you have these wings that play big like Anunoby, or at times Mikal Bridges that he can direct traffic to. But I'm curious, do you think he's like, should I give him more credit as like a stopper in the middle than I think he might be than I was originally giving him?
I don't think he's a defensive anchor. I don't think that. And so if you're trying to use him in the vein of a traditional big man anchor, where I know the Knicks have tried some different stuff with Mitchell Robinson, but like if you want him to be Mitchell Robinson in like the abyss of a drop, no, I don't think that's what I think he's at his best when he can either like the Jokic stuff is like if you have him zero in on an assignment, I think that's always been easier for him. What I think he's gotten a lot better at is if he's allowed to play aggressively or if you have to have him scram switch or pre-switch, I think he's gotten a lot better at navigating the floor in those instances to get out of the mismatches that could wind up hurting him. Or if you're letting him come up to the level and be more aggressive, there are more things that you can do with him. And the question would be, do the Knicks have the guys who can, be the low man on that? And I think OG Anunoby might be I don't know. I don't think he's overrated in that regard, but I think he's someone who is capable of doing that. I think that you could even like lean on a Mikal Bridges in that instance. We could even see Josh Hart do some of it. And so if the Knicks are willing to use Karl-Anthony Towns and or give him a level of agency in terms of his aggression, I actually predicted when we were doing a hot or not pod for every team. I said I think the Knicks are still going to have a top 10 defense. I think they can get to lineups where their defense is really good, but I think that Karl-Anthony Towns has come a long way. And I also think Tom Thiobdeau has come a long way. And yes, he has his penchants, his functional proclivities, but he's been willing to adapt to the personnel around him more over the past like 2 seasons, I would say. And so it wouldn't shock me. I haven't seen a ton of like preseason basketball, but it wouldn't shock me if we see the Knicks play more aggressively, if Towns is playing outside of Tibbs' comfort zone a lot on defense, and that it ends up working because I think Towns has gotten, I know the Knicks don't have Rudy Gobert behind him, and that's something, but if Mitchell Robinson's healthy, you could experiment with that too. So I do believe that Karl-Anthony Towns is closer to a league average defender than a detrimental defender at that point. Might be the best way for me to describe it. And to have a league average defender at the center position, it's a big deal, especially when you're looking at the other end of the spectrum, which would be to have someone who is detrimental defensively at the center position.
I think if that's the floor, league average, maybe it's even the ceiling, who knows? But passable is what I need. Passable is what I need at this point.
The ceiling is because he's in New York that the defense is so good. It's happening when he's on the court and people are clamoring for him to make all defense, which will be egregious. But that's the ceiling because he's now in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will be on the front lines arguing said points if the defense is that good, which will have nothing to do with OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges playing next to him.
Do you have, or would you have any hopes? Like, do you think Tibbs will wind up being more flexible with how he's playing this team defensively when Karl-Anthony Towns is going to be your 5? Like, has Tibbs imbued you with that sort of confidence and his flexibility over the past couple seasons?
So he's already said that they're going to switch more this year, which they kind of have to with their roster makeup. And this is something I've come to understand about this man that is the Knicks head coach, that all these years of frustrations that I had with the rigidity, it's look, I'm always going to have a special place in my heart for Julius Randle. And I said as much on social, like what emotionally that 2021 season was for me post-pandemic is just like life-changing. And it's why I'll always have like a hope that, he does well wherever he goes. But he's not the most flexible in how you can use, like, you can really only use him as a 4. You really can't, like, he's not someone that can help you. Like when we were talking about Mikal Bridges and how you just pop him in and he can fit, like there's a lot of fit concerns with Julius Randle and who can play next to him. There's on nights and off nights with him. And, I think Tibbs knew that and was like, I have like very few ways to make this work. And last year when he went out, I think the Knicks got worse, but you saw Tibbs try different ways with Hartenstein in the short roll and Hartenstein as a hub. And, he tried the possession battle with Precious Achiuwa at the 4. And when the spacing just got too crowded, he went to Deuce McBride and these 3-guard lineups. And, we saw way more ball movements, possessions that were determined to end in the Dante DiVincenzo 3s, and how he was using all of his different guys on offense were just so much more different. Now his roster has changed again, and I think it translates the other side to the defensive end because he doesn't have a dominant rim protector, and the possession battle outside of Josh Hart isn't something that you're going to have to try and win. You can actually maximize on the other end, trying to, switch things up. I don't think they'll switch 1 through 4. Like, I don't know how KAT is switching. And I don't know if I want Jalen Brunson switching all that much. But specifically with your 3 wings with Hart, Anunoby, and Bridges, like they've been called Wingstop so far in the New York area, and I love that nickname because.
Do you? I feel like we could be a little bit more creative. I don't have one.
It depends on how old you are, and it depends how into hip hop you are. Shout out to Mensa, who what is this New York? Why isn't the Locks? The shout out to Jadakiss. Like, why is that not the nickname that we went with? And I just reminded Mensa it's 2024. There are kids that have no idea what you're talking about. So, I think the fact that he has these very switchable wings, it wouldn't make sense to just be like, all right, you guard him, you guard him, you guard him, and that's your assignment for the night. No, now you have guys that can guard multiple people at once. And I mean, you could switch 2 through 5 or 2 through 4. You switch the Celtics switch 1 through 4, and then Porzingis plays that high drop. But then when Horford's in, they switch like all 5. So I would think the Knicks would just switch 2 through 4, and then it's Brunson and KAT have their assignments or their areas, which, man, it speaks to a zone that Tibbs has never played zone with the Knicks. And there are flexible options that they can go to that I think he's now going to because his roster now gives him the opportunity to.
I'm wondering if we could see more. I kind of mentioned it before, just more of I don't even want to necessarily maybe it's pre-switching or it's just, do you rely on Karl-Anthony Towns specifically to scramble out of those mismatches, kind of as they're happening in real time? I think there's a lot of things they could do. And I honestly, the offense is going to be thermonuclear, but I might just be more interested in seeing kind of how the defense unfolds with their top 5 guys on the court, because I think there's a lot of different routes they could go. Do you have any, or not that you have any sense, but let's say Mitchell Robinson gets healthy, knock on wood, or my desk that's right in front of me. Do you think that the Knicks will try playing him and Karl-Anthony Towns together?
Yes, and he should. Not as a starting 5. I still think Josh Hart's the starter, but there are going to be lineups and matchups specifically where Mitch next to KAT is a viable option. And I spoke to the Embiid assignment. I think the Milwaukee Bucks, that's an assignment that I'd want as many big bodies on Giannis as possible. I don't think it should ever be for more than 5-10 minutes in a specific game, but it's going to be matchup dependent, which is why I'm not completely tossing Mitchell Robinson by the curb. I just think that they need to prioritize more durable players into their long-term plans, into their high ceiling plans. But I mean, look, I hope there's Precious Achiuwa lineups this year with Karl-Anthony Towns, which is so ironic that
doesn't there kind of have to be what would be
so Precious is right now is your backup 5, right? And so if you wanted to, your backup 4 is either Josh Hart or Mikal Bridges next to Payne and Landry Shamet and Deuce McBride. You have options there, but if you did want to go to KAT and Precious on the court at the same time, ironically, all this frustration last year of Precious Achiuwa playing the 4 that drove everybody crazy because of the spacing. Now you're putting Precious on the floor with 3 other shooters. As long as Josh Hart's not on the floor with Precious, I hope those possessions when you go to clean the glass and you type in and you put Precious and Josh Hart together, I hope the possessions are less than 10. I don't need them to show. I just hope they just don't show up. I don't even need data from cleaning the glass at that point. Just show me that they played a handful of possessions because it was garbage time, and that's it.
So what do you make of kind of the state of the secondary ball handling, the shot creation, and specifically, are they planning? I don't think we're in agreement, because I know you've said this, they don't view Deuce McBride as that guy. They kind of treat him as this undersized wing, basically. Do we just default to Payne is kind of doing some of that secondary stuff? Does Tyler Kolek have a real chance of being a member of this team, of a contender as a rookie, which is, I'm just going to get out in front of this. I'm not saying you are. I get annoyed with fans who just constantly say like, no, we have this, like this rookie's ready. It so rarely happens on a contender. It just, when's the, like we saw Christian Brown and Derek Lively do it. That very rarely happens. And so I like Tyler Kolek. I just, the idea of wrapping my head around, oh, the Knicks were this reliant on campaign in 2024 or 25, but all their turn to a rookie, it's just hard for me to wrap my brain around and figure out which direction they should or will go there.
So I'll start here with Tyler Kolek. I do think he's going to play a very important role with the Knicks this year. And I don't think he's going to start off as the backup one. I do think they're going to go with a combination of campaign and Deuce as the secondary ball handler. I understand OG Anunoby is on this team. I understand that Jalen Brunson has missed time in the past. He's never played 82 games.
What? I'm sorry. I thought you were going like OG as the initiator or something.
No. Like injuries happen is where I'm going with this.
Okay.
Like I think Deuce McBride will be the first starter off the bench. Like if OG's out, all right, we're going to Josh Hart / Mikal Bridges at the 4, and then Deuce playing the 2. I also think Tibbs could go to Precious, and it'll make sense. Although those are Josh Hart, Precious, Achua lineups, which I'm not a fan of. But I could see it working. Especially if Deuce closes games, I'll be okay with it. I do think he's going to find a way into this rotation for a substantial portion of this year. But to your point about him being a rookie, it's different when it's Derek Lively and it's like you're a rim running center. Like Luka and Kyrie are going to do everything else. You have like the game is very simplified for you. If it's Christian Braun, you're playing opposite Murray and Jokic and all these other veterans that have made your job like just defend and hit threes. Like that's largely your job here. Like Tyler Kolek's going to have to run the offense as a point guard, and that's a lot to ask of a rookie, especially on a contender.
That, like, excel, like, was it Donovan Mitchell in Utah? Was it that like the Jazz were basically good?
So right I'm going to Tatum with mine. With that again was like half Kyrie's team. He was it was just like, oh, this rookie's really great. And during the playoffs, had some moments that year because Kyrie was out, but like Terry Rozier was running that offense. They were running Jalen Brown through a lot of that team. So that to your point, it's very rare, not even just for a rookie, but a second round pick to then suddenly play such a big role.
About Derek Lively's a lottery pick.
Yeah. Like Tatum was the 3rd overall pick here. Like I'll be here for Tyler Kolek finding a role in this team. Maybe the thing I am confident in is he can play point guard in this league and looks NBA ready. I just there are some defensive concerns that I have that I think are gonna need some NBA his NBA body will still have to fill out, and as a result he'll need a little more seasoning. But I do think he's gonna play really well this year and play a lot because I don't remember people don't play 82 games anymore either. So just by necessity, they'll need him.
And I think that could be valuable. Like I don't know if he'll be great right out the gate, but to have, maybe you find out that he's like, it could work.
I'll add one thing. I do think getting him in the second round, the guy probably should have been like a late first and just fell to the second round. And what he was in summer league, what the Knicks evaluate him as, I do think that did contribute, not like the final straw of why they made the KAT trade, but I do think they consider him like an option to go to that made them more comfortable that their depth concerns post trade wouldn't be as drastic.
I actually took it as another vote of confidence in Deuce McBride a little bit.
Well, that too, but
it does show, it shows more degrees of evolution from Tibbs to where, even if this isn't his idea, the fact that the front office is trusting that he would go, like Tibbs doesn't play rookies was just like the thing. Like, remember how Jimmy Butler started out in Chicago, even if it was clear when he was ready. I did want to ask you about Deuce. What are you sort of looking to see because he continues to move up the pecking order as they make these consolidation trades. What are you like? The theory of Deuce McBride is he plays his ass off on defense. He will hit threes and can do like some kind of attacking in open space. Is there more there to explore for him? What are you just monitoring most closely as Deuce heads into this year?
So there's a 6th man of the year conversation as far as I'm concerned with Deuce McBride. Now, who knows especially if he's the starter, if that plays into
Is that
it.
do you think that's a real? I didn't even have that penciled in as a possibility. You think there's a chance that he's a
So
starter?
right now, it depends what book you look at. Josh Hart's still listed as the Knicks representative on odds for 60th man of the year. And I'm sure the books are still adjusting post KAT trade. And Deuce doesn't have odds yet. So there's no, again, these are shout out to Vegas. They're still adjusting to the moves the Knicks make. But on the day of the trade, I was like, so where do they go with the starting five? And if you're saying five out, Josh Hart's not a shooter. So I recognized who has proven himself to be not just a shooter, but a guy that can be successful next to Jalen Brunson and an impactful starter, which he was last year when they went to those lineups, albeit they didn't do a ton of winning because they were very small during that time. But, you know, I don't look at him as the backup point guard, but I think he can run your second unit really well. And it's why, like, I have no issue with Josh Hart starting whatsoever. And I actually think it might be beneficial to really open things up for Deuce McBride if you insert him in for Josh Hart as one of the subs, have him play with the 5-out lineup. Then he's running the second unit with Payne and with Shamit, and you know, whether it's Bridges or Anunoby or whoever you play with the second unit next to Precious, like you just that's a decent second unit where he's probably the best offensive player on it. So I think there's a world where we're like, oh, Deuce McBride is like probably should be considered like top 5 for 6th man of the year at the end of the season. And it's again, it's just what he's done. He's just slowly gotten better, and this is the next ceiling for him to get to.
I do wonder if maybe he won't be playing in lineups that have the same benefits of the spacing, but if you're ever going to insert him into lineups with, like, let's say Jalen Brunson's off the court, but Towns is on the court, like what he could do in the pick and roll within that spacing, I'd be very intrigued to see. We just didn't see a ton of it. Like he ran some of them last year, but like the Knicks everyone's seen that crumple jumper graphic by now. Where it's like the Knicks just didn't have anyone up front in terms of a big man that was pulling defenses out of the paint, like away from the basket.
Well, so the backdoor cutting he would do with Hartenstein too was like a pet play that they ran a ton, where that's why I'm curious if they take advantage of KAT's passing, where you run like those blind pig actions where, you know, you throw it to KAT in the high post and then Deuce is cutting backdoor. Like you have options if you want to use him more as a cutter. But I'm with you. The pick and roll just was not necessarily featured as much because of the limitations of the Knicks centers in the past, you know?
When you sort of look at this team, would you still expect that there's unfinished business when it comes to making trades, probably in the middle of the season? And what type of trade? I'm talking about deepening the rotation, not trying to get another big name in.
Right. I was like, trades, another trade? They've made 4 in the last calendar year.
Well, it comes down to, like, I guess, how confident are you that they do need to deepen, flesh out this rotation, and what type of trade would you like? I guess I'd throw it to you like this: is it more likely that they kind of make a move like that's more marginal, where it's Achua's salary is going out, that $6 million, or could you see them doing something like, well, can we like turn Mitchell Robinson's salary slot into 2 player salary slots? Like, just what are you? We haven't seen the games played yet, but I guess it speaks to what level of concern would you have for the overall depth of, all right, you could talk yourself into like there's 7, or if you want to say 8 trustworthy guys on this team. You also have like at least 2 of them will invariably miss time. And you're going to wonder in the back of your mind, are these other guys just going to play so many minutes that they're due for something to happen? So just where are you kind of at on that entire topic?
So this is a cop out, but I think you're going to have to see it. Like you're going to have to get like 20 to 30 games in. And get a sample size of like, oh, we have 7 guys, we have 8 guys, we probably need 1 more. We know the position, we'll scour the market, and then you assess. I think the reason Precious was signed for the number he was is, to your point, like a very tradable salary. I think Mitchell Robinson, the salary he was signed to 3 years ago, very tradable salary, descending contract that's about to become an expiring contract at the end of the year. You know, that's this is where my trust and my faith in Leon Rose, and more specifically Brock Aller, if there's a trade to be made, they will find a way to do it. They have this Washington pick that I don't think is ever going to convey, but it basically amounts to 2 second-round picks. They have Macri's been on this. They did leave out one swap of the Mikal Bridges trade, and like that's their last actual asset is this one swap that we have no idea if it's ever going to convey or not, because the Knicks might be really good for a long time, but I think it's 2029 or it's 2030. It's a 2030 swap. So like they have that asset, the Washington asset, and then the contracts that you're talking about. And if there's a bench piece that they want to go to, and look, this dictates it a little bit too, but like injuries happen. Like who knows what this roster looks like in January. I think there are some significant injuries that, you wave the white flag for, but if there's a fringe injury that just affects your depth, then it could like say Deuce gets hurt and you're like, oh, we do actually need like a backup guard or a backup wing that can shoot. And that's I think the direction that they would potentially go. But gone are the days of like Derrick Rose is our backup, and we're hoping he and his durability plays a large part in this season.
Are you ready to enter the cookie cutter lightning round portion of the podcast?
Let's do it.
Without having seen the games, what do you consider this roster's single biggest need right now?
A backup point guard.
So you're saying Tyler Kolek's a bust is what I'm pretty much
terrible player. Yes, I think he stinks, and that's a wasted draft pick. No, just like a veteran backup point guard.
Is there anything, which is kind of hard to imagine anything about this team flying under the radar at the moment, but is there anything flying under the radar that we haven't talked about that you think deserves more shine when you're looking at this Knicks roster this season, the whole shebang?
I actually think we covered all of it. It's especially with the last pod factored in. The Knicks made the two biggest trades in the NBA in a span of 3 months, and it completely shook up their roster while also keeping their core and their culture intact. So as far as I'm concerned, they're interesting and a fascinating team to pay attention to, while also I think being a very good one.
Nothing on Jericho Sims there? Like what type of opportunity he's going to have this year?
His opportunity will be injury dictated. So hopefully they get enough health from all of their centers ahead of Sims in the rotation that I don't have to turn to him as much.
Well, this question's actually interesting because I always ask, what's the top 10 rotation look like at full strength? We have I'm penciling in Josh Hart as the starter just right now. I view that as 5 locks. Deuce McBride is a 6th lock. Precious Achiuwa is a 7th lock. After that, with Mitchell Robinson being healthy, so if we're saying full strength, that's an 8th lock. It feels like things can get pretty like experimental and exploratory from there.
So you need me to list 10? Like you're holding me to 10?
I'm holding you to, there's some, you can, if you want to cop out, you can, it happens all the time, but you have to identify the 10 most played players on this team if they're at full strength.
So you said Deuce, you said Precious. At full strength, obviously Mitch. Although I wonder if it's Deuce or not Deuce, Precious or Mitch. Like, would he actually go to Precious and Mitch on the second unit together? Like, how does the spacing work out there?
Yes. Should he? Questionable.
Well, that's a good point.
I do wonder, though, if like the ability, if you're going to play Mitchell Robinson and Towns together at all, does that kind of then open the opportunity for like, oh, we can squeeze Precious in here? But I'm not giving that consideration that Precious could get squeezed out of the rotation with a healthy Mitchell Robinson.
When the playoffs happened and Mitch came back, Precious sat.
Well, I mean, like the Knicks playing 10 players in the playoffs is like, like 5 less than they're going to play in the playoffs.
So Mitch came back with 7 games left and Precious sat. Like that's what I'll add then. Like it was one or the other. So Tibbs did go. The part of this I'm dancing around is I think the Knicks are going to a 9-man rotation because it's been that way for 3 years, So I can give you 10 names, and I think Mitch and Precious are somewhat your 9th and 10th guys because I think if one is healthy, the other's not playing. And then you go Shamet, Payne, and Deuce as your other 3. And then Tyler Kolek's your 11th man. Now, I'm just opening the door for Tyler Kolek and Payne to be interchangeable, or maybe even Shamet to be interchangeable. I think there's a world where Payne shows signs of aging and Tyler Kolek just flat out plays better to the point where they might have actually found their backup point guard. And perfect that he's a lefty playing under Jalen Brunson. So I think those are your 11. See, I thought I was going to shortchange you, and I gave you an extra one.
I forgot Landry Shamet was on this team for a minute. I was so in on him for the first 2 years of his career. I mean, if they want 3-point volume and he's making shots, he could end up being a sneaky important part of this team.
Yeah, who knew that was going to be such an important move? Then they just like randomly signed.
That's the
It was a
one
training camp invite. I was like, oh, this is interesting.
that's the card that tipped everything in the way of this. We don't need Dante
Clearly.
DiVincenzo. We have Landry Shamet.
There you go. Many people are saying that. Yes.
What do you see? This will be, I'm sure it'll be matchup dependent to some extent, or maybe not. But if you had to guess, what winds up being their most used crunch time lineup? Is it just what we're projecting the starters to be, or could you see some kind of futzing and fiddling in one of those spots?
The starting five, like you said, there'll be matchup dependent games where they might go to Deuce over Josh Hart or Precious over Josh Hart. I actually can't see a moment where not Mitch Robinson over Josh Hart. I mean, but I think the way he's used Josh Hart in the past, there's just like very few instances I think where Josh Hart isn't in the closing lineup. So there's your four staples, and then Josh Hart, which honestly probably should be considered a staple at this point.
That would be it would, if we went back and looked at the minutes, like who played the most in crunch time, and barring injury, I would just expect it to be that five by a landslide.
Yeah. Well, he's gotten some of the biggest rebounds in the franchise's history in the last couple of years. Not as well as made some of the biggest shots. So I understand it.
He's also just like maybe as not maybe like Deuce is an on-ball defensive guy. Okay, sure, but Josh Hart is bigger. He plays like more like a big. So just like from a defensive perspective, if you're worried about Towns, having Josh Hart, OG, and Mikal Bridges on the court is kind of a big deal.
Which again, preseason, who cares? And I was mostly watching the Mets, but from all accounts, last night against the Wizards, the Wingstop effect was fully realized, and seeing what those three can do together on the court together with Josh Hart and Anunoby and Bridges has a chance to be really special this year.
Shout out to Matt Moderno, Believe in Wizards, who listened to our record projections for the Wizards. I had them at 13, and he was like, that might be a little much.
Can I ask you a question? Wizards or Brooklyn? Who has more wins this year?
I think Brooklyn will. I know that they have like that smaller finite window, but their players are I just feel like with Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroeder being there, Nicholas Claxton, I think they're going to pick up probably more early season wins than Washington. But I also kind of think that Brooklyn's probably more likely to, if they got to start making moves early, like before trade season, or just like they'd be more likely to. So I had them at 15 and Washington at 13. So it was close.
Okay. So Washington now takes the Detroit position, and Brooklyn
Washington might have the worst defense of all time, is just like where I'm kind of at. And so that's why I think they'll ultimately lose more. Both of these teams are committed. I'm not questioning their commitment to losing.
So John and I did our over-unders. This is before the KAT trade, but he actually took the Brooklyn over this year. He has them at
18.5.
Yeah, he took the over. And I went so far the other way that on the most recent pod that we did, where we did our projections on Patreon for how the East standings would line up, and he has Washington last, Brooklyn 14th. And I'm so confident Brooklyn will be 15th. We have a deal this year. Anytime Brooklyn wins a game, I'm going to buy him a drink. Anytime he has a drink on me, anytime Brooklyn wins a game, I think I'm going to buy him like 9 drinks this year. I think they're going to be so bad.
That's an interesting bet. You're gonna have to keep. Well, I'll know how it's going by looking at the standings, but we'll see how many drinks Jonathan Macri has on one Andrew Claudio.
Look, if there's a world where I'm buying him like 25 drinks, they will be well earned, because I'm their ability to be ass is going to be fascinating when it comes to like, we have this second life where we have control over our draft pick on a year that there's a generational talent at the top of the draft.
I will say, if they win over 20 games, it's almost a disaster for like what was you could still be bottom 4 at that point, but it's a disaster if they win more than 20 games.
And who's the new coach? Should win coach of the year?
Jordy Fernandez.
Yeah, Jordy should win coach of the year because he got that team to win like 25.
Or he should be fired for conduct detrimental to the team's future.
How about both? He went the Dwayne Casey coach of the year award when you're not the coach of the team anymore.
Back to the Knicks. Is there a weirdo offbeat lineup that you would like to see this team try?
Ooh, the weirdo lineup question.
You've been doing this for like 3 or 4 years now. You can't ask like that question catches you off guard.
It used to be I wanted to see them go to the death lineup that I was comparing to the Warriors lineup, and now their lineups are so very specific to, like, there's no 3-guard lineup that I'm interested in, like with Brunson and Deuce and another guard. There's no like super big lineup with Mitch and like a Mitch, Precious, and KAT. Like there's none of that. It'd be funny. Yeah. There is an all defense lineup I think they could potentially go to with Deuce playing point, and with KAT out, you go to Mitch. That I just want to see if a team can score on them when they've got Mitch, Deuce, and then Josh Hart and Anunoby and Bridges. I don't want to see it for more than like 3 minutes because I think the score would be like 2-0 in those 3 minutes. But I think that could be a really good defensive stretch that you could go to. But that's the fascinating part about this thing they've created is their most fascinating, quirky lineup is now the starting five, as far as I'm concerned.
I kind of want to see them like, let's yank Hart out of there, but we'll put in Tyler Kolek. And if you really wanted to get wacky, like let's pull Towns, make OG the 5, and we'll have Deuce in there. But I would kind of like to see
really small. Oh my! So Deuce is the 3 in that situation.
You could do it. I'd be more concerned about what's going to happen on the interior than I'm going to be concerned about what they're doing on the perimeter and that. The idea of you want to go 5 out, I guess, like pulling Deuce for Josh Hart is kind of like, let's meet in the middle. It's like okay, now you're really 5 out, but you did get a little smaller as part of the process.
So you remember when Taj Gibson played for the Knicks last year, and he told the story about he was on his couch watching The Sopranos, and Tibbs called him and was like, "You in shape?" And like. Taj was on the team by the next day because Mitch had just gotten hurt, and the Knicks were like hurting for a backup 5 because they hadn't made the trade yet for Precious, and Jericho Sims was Jericho Sims. So, and they had this game in Brooklyn where Taj was like in shape but not like ready to play 30 NBA minutes of shape. And there's this look that Taj Gibson had waiting at the free throw line where he's gasping for air. And I say all of this because that's what OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges will look like if they have to share the floor with Tyler Kolek and Jalen Brunson. And they're stuck with being both the best wings and having to guard the perimeter and guard the rim and guard everything else if they're playing around traffic cones,
The over-under for this team is 54.5, GMAC. How many games are they winning?
I'm taking the over. And I think they're going to be the 1 seed. So I'll say 58.
Okay, wow. I did go under, and I think I had them at 53. I'm taking in, is it going to take time for this to coalesce? But they're shallower. OG Anunoby always misses time. I don't know what happens to the defense if OG Anunoby misses time. And so
it's fair.
I still think, but this is my next question on top of that would be, are there any matchups that, I think we're universally agreement they are better matchup for the Celtics now following this Towns trade, correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Are there any other matchups in the East that either concern you or just intrigue you from the perspective of a best of 7 series?
Milwaukee. I just have a lot of respect for Milwaukee, and I think Milwaukee's going to be a 2 seed this year. So I think
do you just think Boston's
they suck? Yes. I hate Boston. No, we need to remember, like, Denver was the 1 seed a year ago and then dropped to 3 also. I'm not saying that they're going to be like 10 games worse than the Knicks. I'm just saying at the end of a long season, one where the majority of the Celtics went over and played like into June and then into July and August because of the Olympics. I get it.
Jason Tatum got plenty of rest.
I understand. Travel's a thing. Okay. Workout's a thing. I understand Jason Tatum didn't exactly play in the Olympics, but like Drew Holiday and Derek White also went over there. And Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart spoke to, like, they were exhausted going into last season because they didn't have an off season. So you add in Porzingis not showing up until January, and just the fact that I think the top of the East got better. I don't think there's going to be a cakewalk where the Celtics are taking 3 months off because they don't have any competition for the 1 seed anymore. I think they're going to win 55 games, 54 games, the Celtics. And I think Milwaukee adding more depth, as well as I just think organizational competence and stability, that they're not making a blockbuster trade right before the season starts that requires more of a growing period or a get to know you period, especially for an older player like Dame. Maybe not firing your coach midway through the season also helps.
Doc Rivers is their coach, so I won't rule anything out at this
point.
But
Doc Rivers, like the questions with Doc are the postseason. That's a guy that's like a walking 55 wins.
Their thing is just their health. If you have those 4 guys plus Gary Trent on the court, they're gonna roll.
So I'm projecting ceiling. it is hard to make the case for the Bucks as like the 2 seed and all that I'm projecting. When I go to ESPN's depth chart and everybody has a two red letters next to their name, everybody's got something like day to day out. Like there's an O or a IR or a DD or okay, so or a Q. It's like watching my fantasy lineup for football each week. All right, so everybody's hurt. Got it.
So I have the Celtics at 57 wins and being first in the East, but I think to your point, I did have the Knicks second. They're 53, or maybe did I have them? I had them at 54. I went under, but it was at 54. They will more than I would assume more than Philly, more than Boston, more than Milwaukee. They're going to be the team that cares about the regular season more of that group. Cleveland could be up for debate, and I think some people are sleeping on them. This team is I've used the word a million times. They continue to get more fascinating. It's just been one move after another. Is there anyone I didn't ask you about, Mr. Claudio, that you think needs to be touched upon before I let you skedaddle?
Is this a make or break year for Tom Thibodeau? Since I know we like to fire him on this show.
Well, we're getting to the point where that's the only thing they could change.
I agree, by the way. I do think that this is a make it or break it year for Tom Thibodeau. They lose in the second round, it's him. Like he's the thing they'll change. And then they'll go get like an offensive minded head coach, maybe go get Dan Hurley. That's what we've heard is that like Dan Hurley, the reason he turned down the Lakers job is because the Knicks job might become available in the next couple of years. But look, I like Tibbs. I think he's one of the best coaches in the franchise's history. They're at the point where if you don't get to where you need to go, you have very few options on how to potentially get there the next time. So I think this is a mandatory conference finals run for them. And if not, I think he's the first head that'll roll.
I think that as soon as they made the Mikal Bridges trade, I think that was the case too.
So you know what's funny? I wasn't there with the Bridges trade. The KAT trade crystallized it for me.
That's funny.
You had the Julius Randle piece if you wanted to move it.
I guess my whole thing is just Julius Randle's value is very clearly divisive around the league, and you gave up basically all of your draft equity in the Mikal Bridges trade. So you were kind of at that point where, okay, they proved they had another move up their sleeve, but it was for someone who's starting this supermax extension that very few teams are probably willing to pay. And it doesn't happen without, like, if Jalen Brunson doesn't sign his extension, are the Knicks going to go out and trade for Karl-Anthony Towns and then potentially have to deal with I'm saying maybe this is not a team that is cheaped out a ton. So, but I think once you make that level of draft equity trade, like the coach is like just immediately on the hot seat.
If they lost in the first round with Bridges and like Jalen hadn't signed his extension and it was with Julius, then I agree with you. I think him signing the extension to then make the KAT trade, it was like, oh, now it's the rosters that they've given you a championship caliber roster. Now it's up for you to win the championship or at least finish top 4. And you could look at it as a success. Give Dolan 3 rounds of home games, and he's not going to say this was a failed season.
GMAC, you've already stayed 5 minutes past what you said you were going to, or you're able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic stuff that you do.
All the things. So you could find Knicks Film School anywhere podcasts and YouTube channels are available. You can find Game Theory with Sam Vecini wherever podcasts and YouTube channels are available. You can find Mets Therapy if you want to follow my musings on the New York Mets. Mets Therapy AC on all socials. There's a podcast version that I haven't updated because I've gotten some more short form, immediate reactions from my phone. But if you're into that, you can follow all my Mets and baseball thoughts there. And you can follow me on all socials at Andrew J. Claudio _. I am excited for this basketball season, even though it's not going to start until baseball season's over for me.
Well, thank you again for so much of your time. Congrats once more on the Mets being to where they are. And look, you should go follow Mets Therapy just for the reaction videos from him, like the reactions to him watching the game. I'm not talking about the analysis and the feelings afterwards. I like the visuals of you going through it.
So shout out to Mrs. Claudio, who started a trend of, and we missed the second round version of this, but the last day of the regular season where the Mets were playing a game against the Braves, but she came home from work and I was pacing like the whole living room. I was just pacing. She's like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "They're the ninth inning things." And then she just turned her phone on and recorded the ending. And I was like, "Oh, this is like a nice moment." And so she did the same thing for the game last night. So yeah, you can follow Mets Therapy, and you'll see all the reactions to this improbable magical Mets run.
Thank you once again, GMAC. And as you know by now, I'll be pestering you again in the future.
Of course, because they're of course going to make another blockbuster trade that shakes up our weekends. That's absolutely going to happen. That anytime I try to make plans, the Knicks are like, "Fuck you." So there you go.